Hello and welcome to the virtual open house for the Upper Harbor Terminal Public Realm Infrastructure Project. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us and would like to note that this meeting will be recorded and available for others who are unable to attend to view via the project website. We'd like to start off the meeting by introducing those who will be presenting before providing a little bit of an overview on how you can engage with us this evening via the virtual meeting. Tonight's panelists include Alexander Cato, Transportation Planner with the City of Minneapolis, Nathan Koster, Transportation Planning Manager with the City of Minneapolis, Ahmad Omar, Planning Engineer with the City of Minneapolis, Chris Bauer, Senior Engineer with Tool Consulting, Victoria Dan, Transit Planner at Metro Transit, Nathan Campo, Senior Water Resources Engineer representing the Mississippi Management Watershed Organization, Nico Kubota, Environmental Design Lab Lead at Juxtaposition Arts, as well as several Juxtaposition Arts apprentices. With support from Craig Vaughn, Transportation Planner at SRF Consulting, Lissa Washington, Project Manager at Formula, as well as myself, Dan McNeil, Public Engagement Coordinator, who will be serving as our electronic facilitator this evening. There will be a few different segments of today's meeting. First, a little bit of a background and overview of what has taken place to date as part of the Public Realm Infrastructure Project, and then a presentation providing more detailed understanding of the roadway layouts that have been developed as part of this process. In addition to that, there will be a brief note on transit considerations. We'll then pause for a Q&A from the audience to discuss those roadway design layouts and transit considerations before moving into the second half of the meeting, where we will discuss green stormwater infrastructure as it relates to the Upper Harbor Terminal site with a time for a Q&A there. And then moving into public art concepts, where there will be a presentation on what has been done currently in the design process for public art and some poll questions and opportunity for community questions. At the end of the meeting, we will look to take any general questions you have or return to a part of the presentation that you would like to see for those who may have joined later in the meeting. Additionally, I would like to note that those in attendance will have those attendees joining us today virtually will be on mute and have their camera disabled throughout the meeting. The meeting will be recorded and shared on the project website. During the different segments of a Q&A, attendees have a few different options to participate or share their comments or questions. We encourage you to use the Q&A box, an option that you should see at the bottom of your screen or on your telephone if you're joining us via the phone. That would allow you to type any comments or questions you have. We'll receive those as the meeting presents and encourage you to type them at any time. At those designated Q&A segments, we will then respond to those questions. We'll also offer the opportunity for those in attendance to raise a hand to indicate that they'd like to verbalize a comment. I would ask if you do verbalize a comment to note that you will be recorded. Ask that you continue to be respectful during that time, and we'll note if your time is over 2 minutes and ask you to wrap up your comments. We'll return to some instructions on Q&A when we get to those segments of the meeting. Before starting into a recap of what we've done, I'd like to take a moment to provide a land acknowledgement, noting that every community owes its existence and vitality to generations from around the world who have contributed their hopes, dreams, and energy to making the history that led to this moment. Some were brought here against their will, some were drawn to leave their distant homes in hope of a better life, and some have lived on this land since time immemorial. Truth and acknowledgement are critical to building mutual respect and connection across all barriers of heritage and difference. We are standing on the ancestral lands of the Dakota people. We want to acknowledge the Ojibwe and Ho-Chunk and other nations of people who also called this place home. We pay respects to their elders, past and present. Please take a moment to consider the treaties made by the tribal nations that entitle non-native people to live and work on traditional native lands. Consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today. And please join us in uncovering such truth at any and all public events. And with that, I will pass it over to Alyssa Washington to begin our presentation.
Thank you, Dan. I wanted to start by talking about what we've heard in our first round of engagement, including an open house that happened back in January. So what we've heard and what we've built upon were to design, build, and support public spaces that prioritize inclusivity and community ownership for Northside residents. We want to connect the Upper Harbor into the greater community and overcome that I-94 barrier by providing safe transportation options, offer a riverfront oriented experience with a focus on green infrastructure, which we'll hear about later, and then support existing and future transit service, as we want this to be a vital and vibrant area. The intent and goals here ensure that the information is readily available to the public, all of you and beyond. Strengthen the relationship between the diverse demographics of the North Minneapolis community, the project team, and project stakeholders. We want to create desirable infrastructure and public realm elements that reflect community needs and create community excitement through a sense of ownership. And I think that that will be very well on display with the public art process and where that will live. And we want to ensure that the public questions and concerns are heard. We want to make sure that we can discuss the overall project. Today, we're going to center back on the public realm infrastructure. And just to remind you where we are talking about when we talk about public realm infrastructure, the project area is Dowling Avenue, and we've divided that into 3 sections. So the upper Dowling, Dowling Avenue north over the bridge of over 94, and then lower Dowling. And upper and lower are only distinguished in the fact that the vista from upper, so at that Lake Lindale area, is higher in elevation than down to the river. And then we'll also discuss the future Parkway, as we have 2 phases for that. And finally, another neighborhood access point on 33rd Avenue. So we want to, again, reiterate that we want to provide a safe, a connected transportation system and complementary public utilities, prioritize safe and convenient pedestrian and bicycle connections, and then again, offer that riverfront oriented experience with a focus on innovative stormwater solutions. So just to kind of center us again on what public realm infrastructure is, it's designed to help people access the site comfortably and safely. There are a lot of key components, as you see on this slide, that include a connected system of sidewalks, bikeways, transit lines, and streets, as well as an extension of the public utilities. And this is demonstrated by, the sidewalk and providing bicycle facilities that meet the area, identifiable cross sections for safe passage, public art, and then, robust areas for those bike and scooter stations, et cetera. So just some of the elements. And then kind of in a more residential context, we talk about, I think the big difference here on this one is talking about bridging those intersections and bringing them in a little bit closer so that people are able to cross the street in shorter time periods, and allowing for some of those intersections to be slightly raised, which I think Alexander will explain a little bit later, so that you are able to see pedestrians and bikers more clearly. Bring the lighting down to the pedestrian scale so that it's actually hitting the sidewalk and you feel welcome and you feel safe in the area. So I'll let Dan talk a little bit about what we heard, and then we will go on to the actual intersections.
Right, as we mentioned, this is a second open house, and to inform the design of public realm infrastructure, the project completed an initial round of engagement earlier this year in January and February, including the development of a project website, the launch of a community survey, as well as an interactive comment map, a tour of locations near the Upper Harbor Terminal site, a visual or video tour, a round of focus group meetings with different representatives across the community, as well as mailers and virtual office hours with Dowling area residents. Some of the themes that we heard were the prioritization of pedestrians and bicycles, how this area needs to grow and expand to become more multimodal, safe, attractive, and connected. We also heard some really positive and good feedback centering around public art, that public art should be welcoming, sharing the development history of the North Side, as well as the Dakota history of the area. The river came up time and time again in the engagement work that we did as a place to center and gather, as well as an opportunity for vistas and views of the river, connecting Northside residents and residents across the city of Minneapolis to the amenity that the Mississippi River is. The public realm infrastructure really looks at how people will travel to and from the site. So we heard concerns about safety issues along Dowling Avenue. We heard opportunities for a secondary connection point at 33rd and the importance of those multimodal transit options as well. In addition to some of the ideas or larger themes that we heard, some concerns came out about safety, particularly crossing the I-94 bridge at Dowling and traversing the entire length of Upper and Lower Dowling. We also want to acknowledge that we heard a number of different comments asking for the development here at the Upper Harbor Terminal site to meet the needs of Northside residents, as well as questions and concerns about how this site currently has congestion along Dowling and impacts that future development may have on vehicle travel in the area. With that, I'll pass it back to Lissa to wrap up our recap.
Okay, thank you. And so we talked also about what suggestions we heard. So improvements to the 94 bridge, and then the potential to partner with the Washington Avenue businesses, which I think you'll see an example of that happening with Precision Associates. Foster a sense of arrival and vistas to connect the north side of the river. We want this to be grand and great for the residents and ground and center it back for the north side. And the support for green infrastructure. You know, we want to capture and reuse the water on the site. And that the public art elements could be linked together and lead you to and through the site and offer moments for introspection and for thought and for gathering. And then, you know, again, we've talked a little bit about pedestrian level lighting, signage, greenery, and public art, and making this a really beautiful space for all who visit and all who call the Upper Harbor Terminal and North Minneapolis home. And then the desire to see the bikeway and walkways with a physical separation from cars whenever possible. We want the experience to be multi-layered and dynamic. So with that, I think Alexander is going to go through our roadway layouts with a little bit of help.
Thank you, Lissa, and thank you, Dan, as well, for the great introduction to this project. I'm Alexander Cato, transportation planner with Minneapolis Public Works, and I've been leading the engagement for this project. Really excited to talk through these things. I'll try to move quickly just because there's a lot of content to cover just on the infrastructure as well as the many other pieces of this project. We're going to start at Upper Dowling. This is on the left side of the screen. You'll see, just for orientation standpoints, that is Lindale and Dowling. That's the intersection. So that's the western terminus of this project. And this is where we're starting the reconstruction efforts. If you've been on Dowling anytime in the last few years, you're well aware of what that environment is like for any transportation user, whether you're driving, biking, or walking. We have a roadway in the street, obviously. We have travel lanes. We have on-street bicycle lanes. And then we have sidewalk at back curb. So there's no boulevard out there. Bicycle lanes are in the street. High vehicle volume, about 15,000 vehicles a day. So it's a really, busy area and not really friendly to non-motorists. So we really wanted to ensure that our design for this section provided some additional multimodal comforts. I really like this illustration on the bottom of the screen. It's been publicly shared for at least all of 2021. And it shows the shared use path on the south side of the street. It shows some pedestrians as well as cyclists, sharing that facility. It shows on the north side of the roadway a boulevard with some trees and some greening. And that's what we're recommending for this area. Like I said, it's a really constrained segment. We're not taking away anyone's houses or property or anything of that nature. So we really had to work within the roadway footprint that we had. You'll see we have 10-foot travel lanes. We went with this design to reduce the travel lane, or when I say travel lane, that's the space that a vehicle has to travel. So we reduced those to 10 feet. so that way we can reduce vehicle speeds because we want to have a safe environment for our non-motorist users. Like I said, we have a shared use path on the south side of the street. You'll see this treatment continues all the way east into the site. And we're also intending to utilize this treatment as we start to do future reconstructions to the west. So the other segments of Dowling from Lindale all the way to Theoworth Parkway will be allocated into our CIP in the next coming years and into the next 10 years or so, give or take some time. And our intention is that we continue this treatment. A really good example is 26th Avenue North, which is just about a mile or so south of this area. And they have that's treatment on the north side of the street, travels east and west from the Mississippi overlook that was just installed, and travels all the way to Theoworth Parkway. And it's a really nice east-west connection. So expect to see this treatment continued. And as I go through future slides, you'll see kind of how we start talking about a regional bicycle network. So we're not just providing, one-off bike facilities, but that they actually connect so folks can commute from other places. Obviously we have an existing roadway network. We have, for the most part, a pretty comprehensive sidewalk network, but the bicycle network is something that there's a lot of opportunity for improvement on. We also have a few bump outs. If you look at the middle intersection, that's 6th Street North. So we're adding in some bump outs there to ease those pedestrian crossings and also encourage slower vehicle speeds, while also accommodating the Metro Transit stops that will be operating in that area. A few other things to note on this diagram before we move on. On the third intersection to the east, you'll see the freeway entrance ramps and exit ramps, and we have a raised crossing proposed on that southern side of that shared use path. This would be a first ever. MnDOT's never had a raised crossing on one of their facilities. MnDOT owns the bridge as well as the interstate ramp system and all the entrance and exit ramps. And so this would be a really welcome addition. Chris, do you want to just chat a little about the process you've been going through? Chris is one of our lead engineers on this effort. Has been doing a lot of great design work for us.
Absolutely. Thanks, Alexander. So yeah, as Alexander mentioned, one of the areas we've been closely coordinating with MnDOT is how to make the Interstate 94 ramps as safe as possible for everyone using this. And one of the ideas that we're looking into is a raised crosswalk. So for those who haven't seen a raised crosswalk or having a hard time visualizing what exactly we're referring to, a raised crosswalk is essentially a speed hump almost that tables the crosswalk and slows vehicles down as they cross that intersection where the bikes and pedestrians are crossing the street. So it's really exciting to have the opportunity to partner with MnDOT and try and figure out a way to make this work. At the end of the day, this is still a freeway ramp. It has to accommodate all kinds of vehicles. So we're working very closely with MnDOT in terms of how we can incorporate this, but they've been a really strong partner through this whole process. And they share our vision and our goals of trying to make this as safe and as comfortable for everyone as possible.
Chris, anything else to cover on this before we transition to the bridge section?
I think you covered all the big details. Again, if you have questions, feel free to populate the Q&A and we're happy to come back to this.
Awesome. Okay, so this is Dowling Bridge. Through our engagement, we've received a lot of comments through our public engagement process around, the barriers of getting to the Upper Harbor Terminal site, especially with the bridge that's here, and just the challenges that encompasses. The bridge as it stands today is structurally sound, meaning the overall bridge integrity is at a place where it can last many decades and does not necessitate any structural repairs in the near future. So what you're seeing here is with the existing bridge as is. We're continuing to coordinate and engage with MnDOT. So as future repairs do come about in future years, that we're able to continue to provide additional multimodal enhancements. But with the bridge that you see here, you'll see on the north side of the bridge, the existing 7-foot sidewalk is staying in place. On the south side, that 7-foot sidewalk is also staying in place. What we're adding is a two-way cycle track that you'll see adjacent to the sidewalk. This is actually a 12-foot cycle track with two-way directional. And then there's also a 2-foot curve with a 6-inch raised delineation of space. So if you're familiar with Plymouth Avenue North, and the raised curb bicycle facility that was implemented over there in the last few years, this would be a similar design aspect. This is also a really critical piece in the infrastructure, because at this point you start to see that separation of bike and ped facilities. In the previous slide, we had the shared use path where the cyclists and pedestrians were combined into one space. But here we have a little more space to play with, and we're able to actually separate those users. So in this situation on the south side, you'll see we have a 7-foot sidewalk and then a 12-foot cycle track to separate those users. And this type of treatment continues for the most part all the way into the site. You can see as we cross the bridge, there's another raised crossing. The design template for this is quite similar to the one Chris was referring to on the west side of the bridge. And then you'll see as we cross that raised crossing, you'll see the two-way cycle facility and then a separated sidewalk. A few other things to note as we cross the bridge and start to approach the intersection of Washington and Dowling. Washington is a county-owned road. We've had a lot of great conversations with the county around this intersection and how to improve it. A few things to note in terms of the bicycle connectivity. If you look to the north of the intersection, and Dan, Lisa, do you want to just circle that northern part of the intersection, the northeast corner? Just so folks on the, right over there. So you'll see that we have that two-way cycle track traveling north. And what we're going to do with that, we've worked with the county, and we're actually going to, I would say kind of rehab that area and really just repaint the lines. Right now, that northern section has one-way bike facilities in each direction. We're going to move both of those to the east side of the road. So you'll have a two-way cycle facility separated by some bollards. And that treatment will travel north all the way to the Weber-Camden 44 project, which intersects at Lindell Avenue North. That is under construction in this year and going into 2022. So we're able to connect this intersection, specifically this two-way cycle track, into a reconfigured two-way cycle track that extends all the way to Lindell Avenue North. So in the past slide, I talked about kind of that regional connectivity, and you're seeing how we're trying to not only just make improvements for this project, but just for the rest of the regional travel as well. And then to the south, we're extending a cycle track or a cycle off-road cycle facility next to the sidewalk. This will connect into the existing bike facilities on Washington. These are one-way bicycle lanes in each direction. We are not going to be repainting those on Washington, but we're just providing a more of a buffer transition. You can see it on the east side of the road as well as the west side of the road. Those two-way, those bike facilities that'll connect into that project. We're also working with the county as future reconstruction, resurfacing efforts occur, if we can further improve those facilities as well. But that's not in the scope of this project, but it's still something we're actively pursuing. I'm going to transition to Chris and see if he has anything else from a technical standpoint around this slide.
I think you nailed it, Alexander. That's, in terms of the physical infrastructure that's being constructed here, that really covers all the main points. A detail that's not reflected in the plan view that we're looking at right now is at each of these intersections, there's a lot of traffic, there's a lot of various vehicle movements occurring. The existing signals will remain, so we're planning on having traffic signals at every single one of these intersections. One detail that we're still working on is what we can do with those traffic signals to separate as many conflicts as possible. So as we get into the details of the design, we're going to be looking for opportunities to separate bicycle and pedestrians from some of those motor vehicle movements to improve the safety at some of these crossings. So that's a detail that we're still working on actively.
Thank you so much, Chris. Next slide, please. Okay, so now we have Lower Dowling. This is, you can see the continuation of that, the cycle facility, the two-way one, as well as the sidewalk. We also have a sidewalk on the northern side. We've been doing some work with the property owner there, Pursues and Associates, around some potential art opportunities. I won't go into detail on that now because in a few slides, we'll have some of our other colleagues talk through that. A few design pieces to note here. We do have two active rail tracks here. Frequency is about 4 times a week. So almost every other day there'll in theory be a rail operation occurring. So we're designing in some gate arms that'll come down and block the roadway as well as the bike and sidewalk facilities. We're also installing medians on each side of the rail tracks. Those are to prevent motorists from trying to drive around into the other travel lane and to bypass a train. We all know that's very dangerous. So we've been working with MnDOT Rail because they provide a lot of the safety guidelines when you have a roadway that's crossing an active rail crossing. I really like the illustration at the bottom. This, has been out in the public since early 2021. And I realize it's a little small of an image, but you can see the roadway to the left, the two-way bike facility, some greening, some trees, and then adjacent is one of the properties that is proposed for development. And you see a lot of people, but you see a very active space. And I think this is a pretty accurate reflection of what this space could look like when it's constructed. And it just shows kind of the multimodal nature that we're trying to achieve. Obviously we are still providing vehicle access, but we're really trying to prioritize those non-motorist users. And you'll see that more when we get into the Parkway. One other piece to note on here, as you're traveling east on Dowling, you'll see on the right side of the screen the potential raised intersection. And so this will be, the kind of formal entry gateway into the site. You can see the red road. That red's a little darker than how it'll look in real life, but it'll have that red granite chip surface that you see on all the Parkway facilities around the city. And we're also pursuing a raised crossing. Chris, anything you want to add around the raised crossing or just on this slide before we transition into the next one?
No, I think you nailed it.
Thank you, Chris. Okay, so here's the Parkway. This is a really interesting slide. I do want to caveat that we're still working through some of the design details with this, as the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board is a critical design partner in this. You can see in the center is where the park will be. The park board is leading their own process around those concepts, and we're not ready to share those now, but the park board is working through that. Some of you on this presentation may have been or are a part of those engagement events, and we're really excited to see how the park develops. Also, you'll see on the right side of the screen is a grayed out area. That's for some of the future developments. To the left side of the screen is another grayed out area. That's where the music venue will be, as well as some of the other proposed land use development. So this slide is really just focused on the infrastructure. Once you get into the Dowling into the Parkway, you'll be able to go left or right. To the north, you'll see you can travel and there's a cul-de-sac for turnaround operations, and the same is reflective of the south. You can see on the bottom of the screen, and it's a little tough to see, but you'll see that black trail, and that's the bicycle facility as well as the sidewalk. That will continue through the park. It's just not reflected in this image because the park board is still working through what that process will fully entail. I really like the illustration at the bottom. It shows the two-way roadway. Then you see the bike facilities, and then you see a separated pedestrian space. You see a lot of green boulevards and buffers. You also see that the pedestrian has the really nice views. I think that's really consistent with the way the park board has designed their parkways around the city of Minneapolis. You think of Bede-Makaska specifically, the pedestrians have the closest and nicest and most comfortable views of the lake. And obviously this is the Mississippi River, but we're still, prioritizing design treatments that really cater to non-motorists. The Parkway right now is proposed to have about 19 parking spots. And if you look on the Parkway, you can see a few little cutout spaces. That's what we're proposing for those parking spot locations. We're also working with Metro Transit as well, so they have the ability to operate this Parkway as well. I won't get too into detail on that because we have a Metro Transit representative that can talk in further detail around that, but just know that we've been collaborating with a lot of our partners, the Park Board, Metro Transit, private development, and our MW, Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, to ensure that our infrastructure is really compatible for a variety of uses. The only other thing I want to just bring up now is just on the Parkway phasing. So right now you can see on the left side of the screen that there's a call up for future Parkway extension in this cul-de-sac. So in phase one, we're building the piece of infrastructure you see here. Construction is set to start in 2023 and will either conclude in 2024 or 2025. We're still working through that, but we're looking at about a 2 to 3 year construction window. And then we will be building phase 2 of the Parkway at a future date. We had to really prioritize a lot of different things, and from an infrastructure standpoint, we added Dowling all the way to Lindo. That was not in the original scope of this project. We added 33rd Avenue North, which I'll talk about in the next slide. So we had to add in infrastructure to ensure that we had a really comprehensive network, and at the same time had to postpone building phase 2 of the Parkway. That really impacts some of the motorists, particularly, but overall, you're still able to access this whether you're driving, biking, or walking. It's just how and where you can get into the actual Parkway from a motorist standpoint is a little nuanced. Chris, anything else to add on this slide?
Just to emphasize a point that Alexander made, that the bikeways and the walkways, the pedestrian sidewalks will be connected through that future park area. It's not shown right now. And that also goes for the bikeway and the sidewalks on Dowling. Those will connect to this whole area too. So the idea is you'll be able to walk and bike through the park and then along the river is something that will be incorporated in here.
Next slide, please. So this is our last, or this is my last slide, and then after that, we're going to transition to Metro Transit. So this is 33rd Avenue North. Folks that have been over there know kind of, what it's like. It's, heavy industrial use, used by the local adjacent business properties. There are no sidewalks on either side of the street. But if you just look at the overall network on this kind of bottom right image, you can see that 33rd is a really critical secondary connection point into the site. So we worked really closely with the business partners, as well as with our bicycle advisory committee, pedestrian advisory committee, to provide the best multimodal design that we could. We're still fine tuning some of these pieces, but wanted to share our current draft with you as it stands right now. And you can see on the south side of the street, we're adding in 9 to 8 foot sidewalk. Once again, I want to reiterate, there was no sidewalk there before. On the north side, we're adding in a 10-foot shared use path. Right now, there is no bicycle facility or sidewalk facility on the north side as well. And so these two facilities will connect into the site of 33rd Avenue. We have 2 10-foot travel lanes in each direction, as well as an 8-foot median in the middle. These are included to provide additional maneuverability for the large vehicle movements that occur in this area. There's a high volume of large truck activity. And so we really had to incorporate a design that allows those vehicles access to those businesses, but still provides safe movements for pedestrians and cyclists. And you can see as you travel east along the road, you'll see a roundabout here. This roundabout is designed to facilitate the truck movements. Vehicles will be able to get into the roundabout, do full turnarounds, and also enter into this private service drive in the upper left-hand side of the roundabout. And this will connect into a private drive that'll serve some of the light industrial business parcels on the south side of the UHT site. The phase 2 Parkway, or phase 1 Parkway, will not build beyond this upper right image of the roundabout, and that'll be connected in phase 2, but the sidewalks and shared use bike trails will continue into the site. So there'll be continuous bike and ped facilities into the UHC site that are built in phase 1. Another thing to note, there are 3 sets of rail crossings here as well. So there'll be gate arms as well to mitigate these active trains. This stretch has everything you could imagine in terms of multimodal access and challenges with it. I'll defer to Chris for any additional details on the slide.
Yeah, thanks, Alexander. Speaking to some of the multimodal design challenges associated with all the railroad tracks, you'll notice that the shared use path on the north side of the roadway has a goofy wiggle to it as you go through this area. That's intentional. One of the challenges that we faced from a multimodal design standpoint is that these railroad crossings are a pretty extreme skew relative to the shared use path, which can be a hazard for bicyclists, actually. The bicycle tire can fall into the railroad flangeway. Also a challenge for anyone with a stroller or anything like this. So to try and avoid some of those challenges, we introduced some of these wiggles to square up those crossings and make it safer for anyone who's using something wheeled along this corridor. And then another design consideration that we added in is more raised crosswalks through the roundabout, trying to make those crossings as safe as possible and slow motorists down where those crossings occur. That's all I had.
Same with me, Chris. Thanks so much for the support on that.
Can jump in and just briefly note before we have pass it over to Victoria Dan with Metro Transit. Thank you for those that have joined while we were presenting. Just wanted to note we'll have a few more slides and then our first Q&A where we'll take about 15 minutes to receive any questions, respond accordingly. So please feel free to use that Q&A box if you'd like. And with that, I will pass it over to Victoria.
Thanks, Dan. Good afternoon. My name is Victoria Dan, route planner with Metro Transit Service Development. Transit considerations are, as we all know, important to this project as well as to the surrounding community. So first I'll talk about existing transit near Upper Harbor Terminal. Next, I'll speak to the influence of transit ways that are in development, under construction and planning. And finally, I'll discuss the approach that Metro Transit is taking with regard to service planning at this particular site. So there are three types of transit service operating near Upper Harbor Terminal today. Route 5 and 22 are core local bus routes, and these provide access to downtown Minneapolis and other major activity centers, such as Brooklyn Center Transit Center on the north sides of both of these routes, the Mall of America on Route 5, and Metro Blue Line stations on Route 22. The Route 5 operates on Emerson and Fremont Avenues, about a half mile from the site, so a little far for most people who are walking or rolling, but still within, approximate distance, while the Route 22 is closer by, within a quarter mile away on Lindell Avenue. Route 32 is a supporting local bus route, so this type of route provides crosstown connections and connections with core local route services. Route 32 specifically operates between Robbinsdale Transit Center and Rosedale Transit Center. This route is about an eighth of a mile, which is 600, 700 feet away from the Upper Harbor Terminal site on Lowry Avenue. The third type of route represented here is Route 721, and this is kind of unique in this melange of routes. It's a suburban local bus route that provides transit coverage. So this route primarily serves Brooklyn Park and Brooklyn Center, but it also does provide connections to downtown on select trips on weekdays. Route 721 operates about an eighth of a mile away from Upper Harbor Terminal, that site on Dowling Avenue between Fremont Avenue and I-94. Express routes do operate nearby on I-94, but today no express routes make a stop in the area, so we won't really dwell on that too much here. We can move on to the next slide. So looking into the future, new transit ways will certainly influence the surrounding transit network. Metro D-Line, which is currently under construction, will substantially replace Route 5 and introduce bus rapid transit improvements to the corridor. That's where that half mile kind of comes into play. We would expect that it would draw people from even further than a regular bus service would attract. D-Line is anticipated to open in late 2022. Another major transitway influence will be Metro Blue Line extension, which is in exploration to identify a new alignment of the future light rail line. This spring, the project released revised potential route options, which includes a variety of routing options through North Minneapolis. So both of these projects will be accompanied by transit planning efforts that will look at potential changes to the surrounding transit network. D-Line area service planning specifically will begin late this year or potentially early 2022. You can go ahead and find more information and updates about these two projects online at metrotransit.org/D-Line project or at bluelinext.org. That's bluelineext.org for those respective project web pages. Next slide, please. So these factors, as well as our transit planning principles, help inform Metro Transit's approach to planning potential future service into Upper Harbor Terminal or directly adjacent to the site. First, this site is currently located within what Metro Transit and the Met Council refer to as Transit Market Area 2. So transit market areas provide a general framework for understanding the level of transit supportiveness that you might find in a given geography. They're pretty broad categories, but basically transit market areas range from 1 to 5, with 1 having the most potential to support transit of any kind. such as local and express bus and transit ways, and 5 being the least transit supportive of these categories. Maybe there's general public dial-a-ride, such as Transit Link, which is provided by the Met Council. And maybe there's a limited peak express service to maybe park and rides or on local tails. So Transit Market Area 2, which is approximately where Upper Harbor Terminal site is located. It's a bit on the cusp of 1 and 2. TMA 2, Transit Market Area 2, is typical for urban center communities and is transit supportive, though to a somewhat lesser degree than the most dense and active urban core areas. You'll see on that right-hand map that those dark blue areas, those are Transit Market Areas 1, and they're the core of Minneapolis and St. Paul neighborhoods. We also want to keep in mind transit planning basics when we consider potential future transit to this site. In particular, local bus routes should serve a variety of all-day trip purposes, balance service levels with demand, and provide a simple and direct routing that is legible and convenient for all riders on board. So, at Upper Harbor Terminal, but also along the rest of the route as well. So while there is no direct service to the Upper Harbor Terminal site today, Metro Transit is coordinating with the project, as Alexander previously mentioned, to ensure that the site is designed for transit readiness, which includes how the site plan accommodates potential bus stops and circulations, and considers kind of the universe of options for how we might route service through the area when that time comes in the future. And as the project moves forward, Metro Transit will plan to monitor growth, activity, and transit demand at the site to better understand and plan for potential future transit service. So that's, in a nutshell, our approach to how we're planning today and how we'll continue to plan in the future for service into the site. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Victoria. That takes us to our first designated kind of pause to check in with the audience and receive any comments or questions. As you can see here on the screen, there's some instructions for how to utilize that Q&A option that you should have on your end. Within that Q&A box, you can type in any comments or questions. Those will come over to us as panelists, where we will read them out to the entire audience and respond accordingly. You can also indicate that you would like to raise your hand to be acknowledged for up to 2 minutes of comment or question. And I would just note, we have, after this round of Q&A, a brief presentation about green stormwater infrastructure with questions to follow, as well as a public art presentation with questions to follow. So would encourage anyone with transit or roadway design questions to please use that Q&A box or raise your hand at this time. We'll pause for just a few minutes to make sure we hear from anyone that would like to respond. And I would note that I don't immediately have any comments received or hands raised, so would encourage anyone in attendance to be brave or curious enough to share those thoughts with us. That would be much appreciated. And if not, we'll just pause for a few minutes once again and before moving on to the next section of the presentation. I'll plan to give just another minute of pause here to make sure we haven't missed anybody. You can go ahead and hit the option to raise your hand if you'd like to be acknowledged. Follow the instructions there on the screen to type any comments or questions you have. Otherwise, we'll take advantage of the extra time to to perhaps present again to those who have joined late there at the last 15-20 minutes of our meeting here today. And before moving into green stormwater infrastructure, I would take a moment to compliment Alexander, Chris, and Victoria on a well done presentation. Thank you for that information. I will add it to the chat for everyone to view. There is a brochure available on the public realm infrastructure section of the website where you can review those project roadway designs and the details that we'll be presenting on stormwater infrastructure, public art, as well as what we have heard as part of engagement in that brochure. I'll click that link now. Feel free to share that with others, review that information yourself. It's largely mirrors the presentation that we have here today. But without seeing any hands raised or comments coming in, I will advance the slide to green stormwater infrastructure. And excellent, great timing. I will take a step back here to make sure that I respond to the initial question received. Question being asked is, was this recorded so that I can view the portion that I missed? Perfect question. I appreciate you noting that. Absolutely. Today's presentation is being recorded. That presentation will be available on the project website. So we will go ahead and provide a link to the project website where you can circle back here in a day or two to view this recording, share with others who are not in attendance. And with that, I will looks like Lissa is typing an answer. I'll let Lissa finish before moving on. If there's any other questions, please feel free to share. Otherwise, in just a moment here, we'll pass it over to Nathan Campo and begin our green stormwater infrastructure presentation. Okay, without seeing any other questions immediately coming in, we'll go through green stormwater infrastructure, pause for another Q&A where we'd welcome any questions that may have come to mind. Please feel free to type those in at any time, or we'll pause here in another 15 minutes to take in our second Q&A session. With that, we'll begin our discussion on green stormwater infrastructure.
Thank you, Dan, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to share with you a little bit about what is being envisioned for green stormwater infrastructure, or really district scale green infrastructure for the Upper Harbor Terminal site, across the entire 50 acres, but really focusing on the public realm. Thanks, Dan, for advancing the slide. And so when we talk about green infrastructure, what we're talking about is stormwater infrastructure that can clean and convey stormwater using plants and vegetation and natural processes to clean water before a polluted stormwater runoff from the urban environment before it makes its way into groundwater and into the river eventually. That's as opposed to gray infrastructure, which are pipes and underground infrastructure, which is really important, but doesn't have as many of the additional benefits that I'll be sharing with you today, and that I think will be evident from a lot of the images that have been selected for these slides. So this image here is the headquarters of the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization. Their headquarters are actually located just across the river from the Upper Harbor Terminal site, just north of the Lowry Bridge. And on their site, they restored a historic ravine, using that ravine to treat stormwater from all the new development in that sort of immediate area, and convey that through native vegetation that provides a lot of habitat and provides physical connectivity for recreational connectivity, access to the river, direct access to the river, as you can see from that sidewalk that courses its way kind of around and through the green infrastructure. Some of you may be familiar with green infrastructure such as rain gardens. Rain gardens are a very common type of green infrastructure practice. That's one of the many types of green infrastructure that we're considering and envisioning for the site. And again, I'll show some images of that illustrate that a little bit better. So on the site itself, we're and I'll show maps in a couple slides that show that we're really looking at creating a green armature, really a blue-green armature, the blue being the stormwater part of it, and the green being the habitat part of it, that really can envelop and connect the entire site as well as the adjacent neighborhood and the river. So the stormwater management, this green infrastructure could be located within the parks, between and behind the buildings, along streets, along sidewalks and trails, and provide an expansion of the public realm, even into some of the development parcels where that can occur. And so the upper image, I'll show a series of 3 images that to orient you on this. All 3 of the maps I'm going to show north to the right, the river below, and then I-94 to the top. And these are all sort of cartoon-ish drawings, renderings of that have evolved of what green infrastructure could look like on the site. The top one just generally shows how could we really make the entire site, like I said, this sort of green framework, this armature for the entire site, and do development within that, within the parks, within the native vegetation, within the stormwater management. The image at the bottom then shows, well, how do we layer in the movement of water, and how does that work to connect the site? So the darker blue pathways show how stormwater can move from one part of the site to another in sort of primary ways to really move from one location to the next, eventually making its way to the Mississippi River and providing maximum habitat benefit. The lighter blue shows more of the secondary and tertiary, or the smaller tributaries that get to the larger stormwater features. And if you go to the next slide, then the next map, this shows a rendering of kind of what we are envisioning right now, and we've reached a 30% design level to show what stormwater management managed in a collective way across the entire 50 acres could look like on the site. So between the parks, the parkway, and the development parcels, how can all of that stormwater be managed collectively? So again, thinking back to the images you just saw that were more cartoony, on this one, the blue areas represent the actual stormwater management features that would be filled with native pollinator habitat and provide connectivity down to the river. Even surrounding that is additional, the dark green areas, the additional habitat areas that would be planted with native vegetation. A lot of it would even be connected into the shoreline restoration that the park board is looking into to really restore this portion of the river and provide better habitat as well as recreational connectivity. So really all of this is trying to work together. Within the park itself, we're envisioning that there might even be some features that look a little bit different, that might be a little bit wetter. Some of the stormwater management features of the green infrastructure practices we're talking about, specifically within the park, and then all the way at the south or the left part of the site, at least left on this image, we'll have access to a larger drainage area, a larger amount of development area, as well as some off-site drainage and treated stormwater would be coming onto the site and can kind of pull up and provide a different type of habitat and a different type of water quality treatment. And finally, I'll mention that we're also investigating, this is not as much a part of the public realm piece, at least not related to the Parkway, but we're looking at taking a lot of that treated stormwater, collecting it, providing actually an additional level of treatment, and then reusing that water as irrigation water on the development parcels or within the park, to really maximize the benefit that can be gained through the collective management and treatment of stormwater on the site. And you can go ahead to the next slide. So I want to provide just a few images to close here, and what this could look like. You know, we haven't, no one decided exactly what this will look like. We have we know that that a district scale stormwater treatment is feasible, and that it provides a lot of advantages to the city, to the parks, and to the development itself, and hopefully to the community, and we envision to the community as well. But as we're moving further into design, we want your feedback on what this should look like, what this should feel like, what you like, what you don't like. This is a district scale, really large district stormwater management system that's right here in North Minneapolis. It's the Heritage Park housing development and park that combines stormwater treatment, conveyance through stream-like features that have been recreated to give the sense of Bassett Creek coming back to the surface, open water features, connecting together, stitching together housing development, parkway, and trails. Next slide. This is the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization headquarters. The image I showed a few slides ago, but really zoomed in on some of the stormwater management features that are really up against the building, but then you can't see them because of the plants are so full and vibrant. But there's a series of trails and sidewalks that kind of go around and through these features. So this really starts to get at, well, maybe this is what the interface between the parkway and the development could be like, or the park and some of the development buildings. Really starting to blur that line of, where's the property line? Where does the park and the development begin? Next slide, please. A little further downriver, I guess over in St. Paul, the new Belle Museum has some open water features that relate to the buildings that I think are interesting and worth at least considering, because there could be enough water to have some level of open water features that provide a different type of habitat than just a typically dry basin, and can also provide additional water quality treatment. And then the next slide. Oh, and finally, over in southeast Minneapolis along Riverside Avenue, the city a number of years ago put in a large scale rain garden or infiltration basin green infrastructure, along the sidewalk that again has very simple plantings but maximize pollinator habitat, and really integrated well with the public realm there, to provide treatment for reconstructed Riverside Avenue as well as some of the adjacent streets. And with that, I'll take questions. We're looking for feedback on what you like, what you don't like, how other themes from other things you've heard, other things you've been thinking about for the site could relate to this. Public art is, of course, an important one. There's a lot of different themes that others are talking about that I know that you all are thinking about that we'd love to get your feedback on.
Thank you, Nathan. And with that interest in getting some feedback, I think it's a good time to pause once again and see if there's any additional comments or questions those in attendance would like to share. Again, we'll just pause here. We didn't receive any comments while you are presenting, Nathan, but we'll just take a few minutes to see if anyone would like to respond. Appreciate the initial note that came in here. Before jumping into that, just a brief recap. If anyone joined us That Q&A box will allow you to type any comments or questions you have. We'll read them out and share them with the group as they come in. If you're joining by phone, you can hit *9 to raise your hand and indicate that you'd like to be acknowledged for a verbal comment. Anyone in attendance could also raise their hand to indicate that as well. First question received here is, when you talk about treated stormwater, are you talking about what you are doing on the site with plantings?
Thanks, Peggy. And based on the follow-up question, I think the question is related to the stormwater reuse that is envisioned for the site. And so in terms of plantings that could be irrigated by treated stormwater, really it's a whole host of of different types of plants that could benefit from that. There will probably be in many of the areas open lawn. That's an important part of any park. That's an important part of any development, is to have some areas of open lawn, even if that's more limited, and some irrigation of that would likely be helpful. There are other types of other plantings, more formal perennial plantings that might need a little bit more stormwater or water demand, and instead of using potable water, highly treated water, we could use the reused stormwater collected from the site to treat the plantings on the site itself. Hope that answers that question. And then your next question, Dan, do you want me to just run through?
That would be great, Nathan. Feel free.
Okay.
Yeah, please.
The next question is about cisterns collecting stormwater on site to be reused. And that's a great question. I didn't point it out because it's really more, it's kind of a separate, it's separate from the public realm discussion, but it is related. We're working with the city of Public Works too. And Dan, actually, if you go back to the graphic, I can point it out on the map. Yeah, we're working with the city and have identified a location where we can capture, and it's in the upper part, the little purple rectangle. It says regional stormwater. We're looking to capture runoff from about 120 acres or so of fully developed residential area in North Minneapolis. Basically the water running through a large pipe underneath downlink. To capture that, provide treatment to a right now completely untreated stormwater stream that goes to the river right at the park, untreated. Capture that, treat that to a pretty high level, and then pipe that into the park, and then put that into a cistern that would actually probably be above ground in the park itself. And you can see there's a blue circle in the middle of the park that says water reuse storage. We're envisioning that would actually be a tank placed inside one of the existing grain elevators. So it'd be a way to reuse some of the existing infrastructure already on site. From there, there'd be additional UV ultraviolet light treatment to make sure that we're getting rid of the bacteria, viruses, that sort of thing. And then that water would be pumped into a distribution system to the users, which would likely be the park and the developers.
And I can go ahead and read out the next question for you here, Nathan. Appreciate that response, and helpful to go back to the map here as well. Are there other sources of stormwater coming from the city's storm sewers, or just what is collected on the site? We have a lot of trash on the streets of North Minneapolis.
Again, Peggy, that's a really great question, and the answer, actually, I guess I just answered it, because the answer is yes. We're looking to capture the first flush of stormwater from that about 120 acre area. It's basically all of the the neighborhood from basically where that purple rectangle is. So basically from 94 all the way back to Falwell Park, and basically that portion of North Minneapolis, and capture that, bring that stormwater and any trash and any heavy sediments, and collect that in a large underground tank that's offsite, and then take that water, that additional water, and bring it into the park. So we're not only cleaning it, we're then using that water as a resource for irrigation, but then also to augment some of the water features that we're proposing, the stormwater features we're proposing in the park itself.
Thanks, Nathan. And appreciate those questions, Peggy. We didn't receive any additional questions, so again, we'll just kind of pause for a moment. I'll advance to the instructions on the Q&A slide. If anyone has joined recently, we would just note we walked through a brief presentation as an overview of the project and some information about the roadway design layout options, and then transit considerations. And Nathan just provided a brief overview of what is being considered for green stormwater infrastructure. So pausing here to see if there's any questions in particular to green stormwater infrastructure or elements of the project that have been presented so far. Otherwise, if we don't see any additional comments come in here in the next few minutes, we'll advance to the last dedicated section of our open house, which is public art in the public realm. At that time, we'll go through a presentation and Q&A and pause to see if there would be any helpful sections to go and revisit to represent those that have joined us or other questions you may have. And as a point of reference, I will once again share the project brochure, our packet that is available on the public realm infrastructure section of the Upper Harbor Terminal, upperharbormpls.com website for you to review the information we're sharing here today. I see one additional comment came in. I have watched the treatments on the heritage area on Van White over the years, and it looks really great. So appreciate that note as a positive example of green stormwater infrastructure.
Thank you.
In addition to clearing through those questions, I didn't see any hands raised. So again, we'll pause here for just another moment to make sure we did hear everything anyone would like to share before proceeding to public art.
I will share that I tried my best to encapsulate what Nathan said, and I do encourage and urge you all to go to the website. Also, his contact information will come up later on. And so if you need more clarification or if there are words that are missing or that were added in error, I'm not a green water specialist, so I do apologize now. I'm hoping that I captured the essence of what he was saying.
Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah, I appreciate that note, Lisa. Didn't get any other comments, so with that, I will advance a slide and begin the presentation on public art in the public realm. We'll have Nico Kubota from Juxtaposition Arts lead us through this part of the presentation.
Thank you, Dan. We're excited to be here talking about public art for this public realm project. I'm here with my colleague Preston Dorset at Juxtaposition Arts. So because we're indoors, we're wearing masks, but hopefully you can hear us. Give us a comment if you can. Next slide, please. So I think really the biggest thing that we want to bring you today is what we're calling storylines for the Upper Harbor Terminal. And this is based on work that Preston and others at Juxtaposition have done for a long time. I think I'll introduce him here to start talking about these different themes, and you can ask for the next slide as we go through each individual one. But here's Preston.
Here I am. Again, I'm Preston Dorset. I'm the lab lead assistant in Enviro. And so I've been on this project for the whole time I've been here, which is about 2 years, and helped develop all these storylines. Yeah, and I think we'll go to the next slide so that I can start reading them out. So this first one, food sovereignty in BIPOC communities, is, I guess, is recognizing the history of food sovereignty over North, especially. Like, we have a long history of community gardens, and we also have the history of restaurants, and trying to tie those into the public art. So even I'll explain, like, this little drawing is maybe could include recipes on the sidewalk, things like that. And then also recognizing that through our talks with Native elders and things, that there's been a big shift in how they harvest for medicine and food, and especially, you know, in the Parks Board and in urban areas haven't been able to harvest food how they are taught to. And so giving space for that, you know, that's part of food sovereignty. And I think we'll go to the next slide then. So the ecological harm and disconnection is recognizing what geographically the Upper Harbor Terminal and the 94 highway mean for the north side. So, you know, how the north side was cut off from the resource of the Mississippi River with 94, and then the 2 blocks of industrial that are east of it. And I guess saying more about that. So, you know, of course, there was a neighborhood where that highway was. We've done interviews with people, hearing about what the actual, you know, what things were like right along the river and how that all changed with industrial. Sure.
And then just a note about that little image. Yeah, thank you, Dan. These are just little sketches to show you know, future artists who will be doing work in this area, an example of an artwork that might respond to each of these themes. So this little sketch shows a person being in a place where there's perhaps imagery of the Highway 94 cutting North Minneapolis off from the river, just like Preston was describing.
Thanks for adding that. Okay, now we're ready, I think. And so environmental justice work in vision is, I guess, in some ways similar to that last one, but it's talking about the sort of battlegrounds that those 2 blocks of industrial have become. I'm personally lucky enough to be involved with that, and I think a lot of people over north are clued into the, at times, like legal battles of us trying to, I guess, gain our health back from what was, you know, taken by the big industrial places who pollute the rivers and the air, and sometimes we notice that. So we hear a lot about that, and it would be a great opportunity due to the proximity to those big polluters for us to highlight that and honor those who are doing the work, I guess, against them. So yeah, great. And that's all for that slide. You can go to the next one. Appropriation of UHT was something that came out of, you know, our initial interviews. And when we were interviewing, you know, a graffiti artist mentioning that in some ways graffiti artists and other urban explorers, anyone interested in these kinds of, like, you know, disused places, they think about them as parks in a lot of ways before the Parks Board even got to it. So appreciating that, and appreciating that because of the art that they put throughout the site, that it in many ways was more able to be recognized as a public place. And then, and then the settlement history of the north side is very much, you know, storytelling. There's a lot of change that's happened over north throughout, you know, the past 100 years. Populations have changed. It's continued to sort of be a place where people immigrate to, people come to work, you know, start out working very hard. That'll be explained a little bit more with these drawings that we did, but also recognizing what the north side was pre-colonialism, and exploring all those layers. Okay.
Thank you, Preston. So I just want to underline that that's, Preston's mentioned a number of different interviews and research that he and other young people at Juxta have undertaken, both for this project and also another Upper Harbor project where they worked for the Park Board, so focusing on the recreational space there. But those are sort of these main 5 storylines, we're calling them, that will make up our art study for this region. And then these will in turn guide when art is selected for this space. We hope that these 5 themes will guide the selection of that art and help those artists have their art reflect kind of the history and the needs of people in this area. So with that, we're going to transition to a little more specific piece of art that is being proposed for this place. There still is another kind of procedure where we're going to go in front of the Minneapolis Arts Commission and propose this piece of art and ask for funds to add it to this Urban Realm project. But we'd love to hear your feedback specifically on the things that we're working on right now. So if you can see in the upper image, this is very similar to something Alexander presented before. This is Dowling Avenue as it comes down and actually intersects with the new Parkway. And right in the middle of the image, you'll see 3 kind of brownish red lines. And that represents a small screen wall that Precision Associates, a company right by Upper Harbor Terminal, is going to be installing. And we're proposing to have some art installed on this screen wall, and it'll be somewhere where you see it right as you enter the site. So the image on the lower right shows you one possible way this screen wall might look. Currently, it's only required to be 2 feet tall, but it's quite long. It's about 190 feet all told. And so in this image, you can see little representations of these working hands that you saw earlier. Dan, can we go to the next slide? So we have 3 concepts for you guys to consider and give us some thoughts on. But this first concept we're calling working hands, and this stems from what Preston was saying, this idea of following the storyline of the settlement of North Minneapolis. There's been many different groups of people who have come to Minneapolis and Minnesota from farther away. But one thing that we found is really common through interviews with people who live here, with historians, is that often they come here to work with their hands, to work hard, to do jobs that are really difficult, take a lot of work. And so we thought one way to celebrate that and talk about that history was to show those very hands laboring on different kinds of things, whether it's farming, baking, masonry, things like that. Can we go to the next slide, please? A very different theme that we could follow in the same location is river movement, kind of talking about environmental justice and the resource that the neighborhood has been cut off with historically. So this is another apprentice of ours has focused on sort of that movement you see within the water of the river. It's a much more abstract expression. Next slide, please. And finally, like Preston was saying, sort of honoring the aerosol artists who've sort of taken over Upper Harbor and shown us sort of that it can be an art gallery in a park. Being inspired by that sort of graffiti energy, and then also overlaying what might be sort of a natural pattern to acknowledge the nature that's there as well. This concept we're calling graffiti energy. So I think we can go to that sort of question and answer, more interactive section, but we have a poll for you guys to answer here. And this is kind of a how supportive of you are you of each of these concepts? And Dan, I think you constructed this question. Could you help us a little bit with this particular one?
Yeah, of course. So it'll be a kind of a series of 3 poll questions asking audience members to kind of rank 1 through 5, their level of support. So we'll go ahead and launch this poll. You should be able to move through each of the 3 questions at once. And please go ahead and hit respond to those. We'll allow a few minutes and make sure those in attendance have a chance to share their input, and then we'll close the polls. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll now. You should see that appearing on your screen. And while those are up, I can go ahead and just read out the question to everyone in attendance. On a scale from 1 to 5, how supportive are you of the working hands screen wall concept? 1, strongly do not support. 2, do not support. 3, neutral. 4, support. And 5, strongly support. We'll go through this same type of question with both the river movement and graffiti energy to gauge your level of support for all 3 concepts. I'm getting a number of responses to come in. We'll pause here for just a few more moments to make sure everyone who would like to has an opportunity to complete the polls. Nico, as we get a few more responses in, I would note, I think we'll be able to share those out. So feel free to, in a moment here, if you'd like, walk through those initial responses or share any reactions you have to what we're seeing once we close the poll.
Perfect. And I think just for the next step after the poll, we have a question sort of in the middle bottom of this slide, which we'd love to hear from people here. Do these storylines feel appropriate to this place and to inspire art for this project? So again, we are creating sort of a guide for artists who do art in this area to have something cohesive and benefit from the community engagement we've done to respond to with their art. So we're hoping to hear from you if you think this is a sort of the right way to guide artists in the future. Are there other things you'd suggest? Are there gaps that you see? Things like that. And finally, at the bottom there's Mary Altman's email. In case there are artists out there who feel like they would like to do art for this site in the future. If you email Mary, you can get onto the official call for art that will go out when such a thing happens. So then you'll be first to know how to propose to have your art on this location. So with that,
I would just note to the audience, looks like we have kind of had about a 45-second pause in responses. So please take another 30 seconds if you would to share any additional comments or responses to this poll before we close it.
and I'll go ahead and read one of the responses. If you pursue river movement, please note that the graphic, which shows eddies, doesn't actually reflect how the Mississippi moves. So that is good feedback for us to take, certainly.
All right, we had another response come in. I'm going to go ahead and give it another 10 seconds before closing the poll. Please share any final responses, and then we'll review those who have shared and how much they would be willing to support each of these concepts. Very good. We'll close the poll now. Okay, and then I'll go ahead and share results. Nico, if you'd like to walk through.
All right, so this is for the first choice, working hands. We have about 30% strongly support, 30% support, 30% neutral, and 10% do not support. So kind of generally positive. Maybe a similar kind of thing for choice number 2, river movement. We have 40% strongly support, 50% support, and 10% neutral. So I guess overall maybe a little bit more positive. And then we have a kind of more across the board response for graffiti energy, the third option. We have 30% strongly support, 20% support, 20% neutral, 20% do not support, and 10% strongly do not support. So it's interesting to see we have some more negative responses to that one too. So again, thank you for your responses to these. We're going to take this all under consideration, and we're still happy to hear any feedback you have for us, whether it's for these 3 kind of options moving forward on this one art piece that we are proposing to do, or if you have sort of more general responses to the storylines or ways that they could be interpreted in the future.
Exactly. So I will advance one slide to kind of explain that Q&A box, and then happy to jump back to the slide at the beginning that demonstrated the different storylines if anyone would like to share their feedback of how those storylines resonate with them. I did see, Nico, as we encourage others to participate or share their thoughts, that Mary has her hand raised. So maybe I'll go ahead and allow you to unmute and share any additional comments or comments. Would ask that that when you are able to talk, take a moment to introduce yourself, Mary, which now you should be able to unmute and connect with the rest of the audience.
Hi, this is Mary. Actually, I did not intend to raise my hand, but
No
I do
problem.
want to congratulate the team on doing such a great presentation.
Very good. We appreciate the comment there. I'll go ahead and lower that hand.
Thanks, Mary.
And while we're waiting for additional comments to come in, I'll slide back to just make sure everyone has one more chance to see each of those storylines for public art and the themes that should be coming through. So please feel free to share any Q&A comments, raise your hand if you'd like to respond to the comment about how you see these comments, how you receive them as themes, any additional thoughts you'd like to share. Not seeing any immediate comments coming in. Alexander, if you're available, I think one question that we got, I'd be curious if you had any note to share. This is in regards, admittedly noted a little off topic, but is the amphitheater a done deal? And what about the other development parcels? So I know this goes a little outside of the public realm infrastructure and the public art. Any note to share or resources to pass on as it relates to development parcels?
Yeah, absolutely. No, thank you for the question. I mean, although this is the infrastructure, we understand that there's a lot of other pieces at play. You know, Peggy's question is a perfect example of that. So I'm just going to restate the question just for folks listening in that may not have seen it or heard it. Peggy says, is the amphitheater a done deal? And what about the other development parcels? So CPED has been leading in tandem with United Properties, the main developer. They've been leading a coordinated plan effort. There's been previous open houses around that. Where that sits right now, there is a draft coordinated plan that includes the amphitheater. It's also being called a music performance venue. I may have gotten that name a little off, but it's a performance venue in partnership with First Ave. There's also a variety of other developments that'll come in different phases for the site. That is all part of the coordinated plan. That is set for approval in October. One prerequisite step to that is the AUAR, which is also under review, and we'll have a formal approval process in October. So to summarize, those items are still included and are likely to be formally approved in October with the AUAR coordinated plan.
Thanks, Alexander. Appreciate that. And that upperharbormpls.com would be a good place to find out more about that AUAR process. Nico, this is a public art related question. Maybe you or the apprentices may like to respond to. Wondering if there are any ideas to educate or showcase Dakota culture along the river.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So as you saw in the current 3 options for this precision associates fence, you don't see any direct effort there. I would imagine that in future requests for proposal or requests for qualifications from the city, it seems quite possible that there would be a request for either generally for art that responds to the themes we asked for, which include things like native food sovereignty and settlement history, which definitely should include settlement by Dakota and other people who've come before colonialism. And actually recently, just being an artist myself, I saw the city issued a request for qualifications at the Waterworks site that was specifically for people who have Dakota knowledge and connection and heritage. So I'm not going to say that it's going to happen, but it's quite possible. And the city has the language to do just what you're asking about.
Thanks, Nico, and thank you for the question. Appreciate that. That a similar type of question did come up in a few of our focus group discussions and survey responses. So nice to hear the question about understanding the settlement history of the North Side and Dakota culture along the Mississippi River. It's now 5:30, coming up on the last half an hour of the presentation. We have moved through each of the segments that we had planned to present here in our first go around. I believe a number of those in attendance have been with us from the beginning, but if anyone would like to ask any questions generally about the Upper Harbor Terminal site, about the public realm infrastructure, or any of the sections that we presented here today, I'd be more than happy to make this an open Q&A. Would also note, you can go ahead and use that chat if you would like, if you'd be interested in hearing a brief presentation or synopsis of those sections that came before you joined the meeting. That would be a brief overview of the project itself and the engagement that has been done to date. A summary of the roadway design layouts that are being proposed as part of the project for Upper Dowling, crossing I-94, Lower Dowling, the planned Parkway through the UHT site, as well as 33rd Avenue. After we went through that, we had a short presentation from Metro Transit on transit considerations at the UHT site, followed by a presentation on green stormwater infrastructure from the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, and then a discussion on public art in the public realm presented here by Juxtaposition Arts. So just a brief recap on where we have been during today's meeting. It is recorded and will be posted online. So please let us know if you have any general comments or if there's a section that you would like to return to. And as we wait for responses, I will advance to the contact information for our panelists here today. And not immediately seeing any comments or questions come in. Please take your time if you do have them. No rush here. Would note that kind of takes us through the presentations that we had planned. I had a few comments come in, so we'll continue to respond and stay on until 6 for those who are interested. Otherwise, please do stay in touch by visiting the project website, reviewing the project brochure, and helping us to spread the word by noting this project and the plans that are in place with friends, neighbors, colleagues, and others who may be interested. And with that, looks like a question came in that we'll receive and respond to. If we have a 10,000 person performance venue, where are all of the cars going to go? Sure, some people will use the Metro Transit or bike, but I think that there will be a huge parking problem. Alexander, this might be a good question to pass your way initially.
Yeah, sure thing. Great question. The performance venue is going to have definitely some large scale events. I believe the capacity is closer to around 8,000, but still 8,000, 10,000, it's still a lot of people, and your concerns are very relevant and have been very common over the last several years, especially for nearby residents that are concerned about congestion impacts, noise impacts, etc. And so with the AUAR, which the final version was finalized, just kind of going through those final stages, but is available for public view, and Dan can provide that link. There is a traffic event management plan. And that's similar to any music venue or performance venue we have in the city has to submit an event management plan, US Bank Stadium, the Armory in downtown Minneapolis, Target Center, Target Field, etc. They all have to submit a plan. And when I say they, I mean like the owner of that business. So in this situation, it's First Ave is responsible for submitting a plan that delineates their traffic impacts and how they'll mitigate those impacts. And right now it's more in the strategy phase, and there's a variety of strategies that have been proposed. I can list off just a few of those. Once again, these are proposed strategies that are still being investigated and explored, but they are ways to mitigate impacts. So I'm just going to list off a few of those, and then we'll provide that link for more further research in that. One of them is providing a shuttle service. So they've been exploring, could they have a shuttle service that picks up patrons to that event somewhere probably in downtown Minneapolis, maybe at one of the ABC ramps, and then transports guests to that event. After the event is over, guests would load that bus again and be transported home. That would be a really effective way of moving a large amount of people on a single bus or on multiple shuttle buses. Another reason is the multimodal network we're providing. Obviously, I talked extensively about the multimodal bike facilities that we're providing to the site, the pedestrian facilities to the site. We had Metro Transit on the call. As transit demand is realized and they'll be able to provide more comprehensive transit service, that'll be a really effective way to reduce those impacts. We also have been working with Metro Transit so that transit on site is feasible from a design standpoint, and that we're ensuring that a transit bus can come to the site, drop off, wait, pick up passengers, turn around and exit the site as well. So those are some things. We're doing a parking inventory of the parking within the area to assess availability, capacity, demand. Also working to mitigate neighborhood concerns around some of the areas, especially on the other side of the Dowling Bridge. A lot of residents over there have expressed concerns about having to deal with the increased parking for such a large scale event. So there's some checks and balances in place to ensure that those areas aren't overly burdened by some of those parking impacts from an event like that. Also looking at establishing drop-off pickup zones for some of the TNC users. TNC means Transportation Network Company, which really means just Uber, Lyft, et cetera, and those car sharing services. So having a specific designated point where those activities will occur. Minneapolis has done that in the past in the warehouse district in downtown, especially at night when there's a lot of late night activity at some of the bars and whatnot, having an organized, centralized space for those Ubers and Lyfts and et cetera, so that we can better organize and control that. I think that's a pretty good list. Once again, this is still being evaluated, but I would say just know that we're taking it seriously. We're working with First Ave to continue to develop a plan that works. Those large scale events, I think, are somewhere in the 30 to 50 nights a year, and I may be misspeaking on that, but it's not going to be every night that those large scale events will happen. But we still do want to ensure that we're mitigating those. That's all I have in that response for that. Hopefully that kind of helps provide a little bit of assurance in terms of how we're working with First Ave to ensure that those impacts are mitigated.
Thanks, Alexander.
And just one caveat, when I threw out the number of large events in the 30 to 50 range, I can check on that because I may have misquoted that number. So I'll verify that momentarily.
Appreciate that. And I did add a link in the chat as well to that environmental review where you can learn more about the AUAR. A few more comments that we can respond to here. As you can see, it's turning into a pretty nice day after a rainy start. I've been toggling around my screen, avoiding the sun through the screen here. So appreciate everyone joining us here and taking part in this discussion in what is turning into a nice evening. Lisa, I will wait for you to respond. Looks like perfect. So I will make that last question public here and respond to the next question we received from Nick. I know that this entire project is being done in stages. What is planned but won't be part of this first stage of development? I know we had discussed during the roadway design, which I'm happy to jump back to that the Parkway as roadway design will be occurring in 2 phases, and that is something that you can take a deeper look at through the project brochure, where they have those roadway designs laid out and clearly labeled as phase 1 and phase 2. Alexander, any other notes you'd like to make here about elements of this project that will be conducted in phases? And I anticipate or assume that this is in relation to the public realm infrastructure parts of the project specifically. Nick, please feel free to clarify if that's not the case.
Just one second. So is the question on the phases of infrastructure development or the phases of private development? I'm just a little unclear.
Yeah, and Nick, if you would be kind enough to provide a little bit of clarification there, that would help us respond to this. I interpreted it as public realm, but it does leave room for interpretation there.
And while he's responding, I'll just circle back on my previous comment on the event management plan. I was able to pull up the AUAR and the event management plan, thanks to the support of a colleague. There's going to be about 20 large capacity events that are going to be in that 8 to 10,000 range. So about 20 events a year of that scale, about 10 events in the 6,000 to 8,000 range, another 10 in the 4,000 to 6,000, and then about 5 in the 2,000 to 4,000 range. So it just gives you a sense of scale. Basically 20 really large scale events, and then starts to decrease in volume. And also to clarify, the capacity is 8 to 10,000. I know I said 8,000 before, so I apologize for that. Yeah.
Thanks, Alexander. And I haven't seen a clarifying note come in from Nick yet, so we'll return to that question. And perhaps take the additional comment received here, or question I should say, received here. Originally, the amphitheater was depicted as directly on the riverbank. Have plans been changed to keep all buildings away from the riverbank, like between Broadway and Plymouth Avenue?
Yeah, so it's a great question. The way, and you know, that original concept, I'm not sure exactly what concept you were referring to, but I know there was a lot of like iterative illustrative designs, you know, over the last 5+ years. And I think it's when things are in a very early stage, they're just kind of providing some illustrative concepts. You know, we've come in and worked with the park board and a lot of the community to prioritize river access for people. And that's why when you look in the concepts that we shared with Parkway with phase 1, and I talked through that illustration, you see pedestrians, cyclists, you see pedestrians, cyclists, cars. The pedestrians are closest to the river. So across the entire Parkway, for the entire UH2 site, you know, that will be consistent. There will not be private development directly on the river. There will be the multimodal infrastructure network, and then all development will be behind that or further away from the river. So I think that's a great question, and glad you're asking that to give us the opportunity to clarify. So what you see in the presentation with the Parkway is the way it'll be built. Yeah, so here you see the diagram. All of the green is Parkway and Park. And then behind that in the kind of light gray, that's not really, all of that is private development. So you'll see the Parkway, the park, the sidewalks, et cetera, are going to be closest to the river. And even in that illustration down there, this is more of the southern end, but you can see those buildings are behind the infrastructure.
Appreciate that, Alexander, and very good question. Appreciate the clarification there as well. We did not get any additional follow-up clarification to Nick, but we are on this slide where we kind of showed the phases of the Parkway. So Alexander, would you mind just maybe taking a quick minute there and highlighting that?
Yep. And so, you know, we've worked a lot with CPED around the kind of sequencing of the developments. The coordinated plan does provide a lot more detail around the land use components and the timing and sequencing of that. The reality is that the infrastructure is going to come in first. We're going to start construction in 2023. So we will be, we being Public Works will be the first folks kind of clearing the facility and then putting in our infrastructure. And then closely after that, you'll see phase 1 development. So in the kind of right side of the screen, just north of the T intersection is parcel 1A and 1B. Parcel 1A is part of phase 1. So that'll likely start getting built, closely after infrastructure is completed. The concert venue, which is just south, kind of near the southern end of the cul-de-sac, will go in phase 1. South of there is more of the light industrial, and that some of that will go in phase 1 and some will go in phase 2. And that's kind of the core of the phase 1 development. I think actually a little further north along Dowling, some of those developments will start in phase 1 as well. So there's a little kind of a mix and match of the developments that are going in phase 1. And the coordinated plan does delineate that quite a bit more clearly than the infrastructure piece does, since we as in Public Works are really just kind of tasked with designing the infrastructure components.
Appreciate that, and would note that takes us through the comments received here during the open Q&A. So we are coming up on the 6 o'clock hour, but would encourage anyone still with us to share any thoughts, a request to return to a slide. Any notes you would like to share would be more than welcome, and we appreciate all of you joining us here and staying around for the entire presentation. If you don't have any additional comments or questions, we will stay on here for another 10 minutes, but please feel free to consider this the end of the meeting and look for more information by visiting upperharbormpls.com. Finding your way to the city's Gov Delivery email updates is another excellent way to continue to get updates about different elements of the Upper Harbor Terminal and the planning process that's taking place. And give us a few days, but then please help us spread the word by sharing this recorded presentation and the project brochure, which is already available, with your friends and family who may be interested in this planning process.
Yeah, thank you everyone. Dan, thanks for emceeing Alyssa as well.
Agreed. Yes, thanks to all, and thanks to all our presenters here today. It was nice to be able to take a couple hours to walk through lots of work that's been done as part of this plan. And without any additional comments, we'll look to conclude the meeting now. I'll be happy to stay on for a minute just to make sure that everyone who would like to is able to participate, but please feel free to consider this the end of the meeting, and a heartfelt thank you for joining us this evening. And with that, I will stop the recording and thank everyone again for joining us and participating this evening. Enjoy the afternoon and the sunshine that has arrived.